Chapter 1. The Vanishing Beacon. The case arrived like an unexpected bolt to an otherwise routine morning. A blood-stained coat had been discovered near the base of an isolated lighthouse, its existence a silent testament to a mystery that defied the ordinary. News of the incident swept swiftly through the local circles, eventually reaching the keen ears of Holmes. In the quiet hum of Baker Street, Holmes was already immersed in contemplative silence when Watson entered with a measured stride and a countenance edged with both concern and curiosity. Holmes, with his piercing gaze and methodical mind, recalled previous puzzles that had danced on the periphery of the unexplained. Watson, ever the faithful chronicler, noted in his diary that the case carried a peculiar weight, one that hinted at long-buried secrets and unresolved grudges. Watson remarked, Holmes considered the coat a message, a token deliberately left behind to signal a story of deceit and concealed identities. Holmes' reply came softly, yet it resonated with a fervent intensity. Watson, we are witnessing not the aftermath of an accident, but the deliberate orchestration of a vanishing act. In that blood, there is a tale waiting to be deciphered. Without delay, the detective and his assistant embarked on their journey towards the lighthouse. Their conversation, woven with observations and theories, revealed layers of intrigue. Holmes noted that the coat's distinctive pattern was reminiscent of garments once worn by men of dubious repute. Watson recalled that local whispers spoke of a lighthouse keeper whose past had been shrouded in scandal. It is as if fate has aligned itself to compel us toward a man who dared to leave his old life behind, Watson recorded with a sense of foreboding. The pair's journey was punctuated by their reflective dialogues. Holmes mused on the nature of identity and the lengths to which an individual might go to escape a tarnished past. He recalled a case from years prior, when a notorious convict had vanished without a trace, only for his legacy to be revived by the echoes of suspicion and revenge. Every detail, no matter how minute, is a clue to the truth, Holmes intoned. We must be vigilant in observing what others might dismiss as mere coincidence. Upon reaching the periphery of the small coastal settlement, the duo encountered a local informer whose countenance was etched with the strains of worry and quiet resignation. The informer recounted in halting phrases the peculiar events of the previous night, the strange lights that danced near the lighthouse, the hushed whispers in the wind, and the sudden disappearance of the keeper who had been a fixture for decades. In a measured tone, the informer said, I have seen many oddities in my lifetime, but never have I witnessed such a deliberate erasure of a man's existence. Holmes listened intently, absorbing every nuance of the testimony while Watson dutifully scribbled down every word. In the ensuing hours, Holmes and Watson engaged in a thorough investigation of the immediate surroundings. They collected what little physical evidence lay in their path: traces of disturbed earth, fragments of fabric clinging to the rocky terrain, and an inexplicable smear of crimson that seemed to lead towards the lighthouse's silent silhouette. Watson noted, the evidence appears to be both sparse and meticulously arranged, as if it were placed by someone who knew precisely how to mislead and confound. Holmes responded by stating, there is deliberate intent in every gesture. The scene is crafted with precision. I suspect that our missing keeper has orchestrated this disappearance to secure a semblance of freedom from a haunted past. As the investigation deepened, a series of curious details began to emerge. An old journal, found tucked within a weathered trunk in a deserted outbuilding, contained cryptic references to past misdeeds and a desperate need to vanish. Holmes remarked, the journal speaks of transgressions committed in shadows and the pursuit of a redemption that can only be achieved through anonymity. Watson, reading the faded ink, observed, the tone is both remorseful and resolute. A man haunted by the weight of his former crimes, yet determined to embrace a future free of consequence. The narrative took an unexpected turn when Holmes received word that one of his trusted contacts had recognized a detail in the photograph of the coat that was circulating among the local authorities. The contact, a seasoned ex-detective with an eye for detail, noted that the pattern of the fabric and the stitching bore the unmistakable mark of an era long past, a signature of a tailor known to cater to those who lived on the fringes of society. "There is a method to the madness," the ex-detective had said in a hushed tone over the telephone. "This is not merely the work of chance, but a calculated effort to obscure an identity that should have been consigned to the annals of history." The intrigue deepened as Holmes began to piece together the scattered fragments of the case. Each clue, each whispered testimony, and every stray impression in the dust seemed to point towards the lighthouse keeper's past. The man, it appeared, had once been entangled in a web of criminality, his life marred by a betrayal that had forced him into exile beneath a fabricated identity. Holmes recalled his earlier musings, stating, "A man desperate enough to fake his own death must have had reasons profound and harrowing. There is a darkness in the corridors of his history that we have yet to illuminate." Even as Holmes pondered the implications, Watson recorded the detective's reflective thoughts. Holmes believed that every secret had a cost, and every past misdeed left an indelible mark. The man behind the coat had paid a price in the currency of fear and regret, and now that price was being exacted by forces beyond mere mortal retribution. Watson's pen danced across his notebook, capturing the intricate tapestry of motives, secrets, and the inexorable pull of destiny that now bound the case. In a quiet exchange that was both measured and deliberate, Holmes confided to Watson, "I have reason to suspect that the very circumstances of this disappearance have been engineered not solely by the keeper himself, but by an adversary from his former life. The precision of the staging hints at an individual whose vendetta runs deep, a rival whose past transgressions are interlaced with our keeper's own." Watson's eyes widened as he internalized Holmes' words, and he later recorded, "The possibility of an old enemy resurfacing brought an element of personal peril to the case that was both unnerving and invigorating." Thus began the unraveling of a complex narrative, a tale of guilt, redemption, and an unyielding quest for truth. As Holmes scrutinized the minutiae of the case, he recalled that the mind of a criminal, when pressed by the forces of fate and revenge, often left traces of its inner turmoil in the most minute details. "There is beauty in the chaos of deception," he mused quietly, "and in that chaos one may find the blueprint of a soul in torment." Watson, in his unwavering admiration for Holmes' analytical prowess, remarked in his journal, "Holmes' ability to discern patterns amidst the randomness of human behavior continues to astound me, and today it has led us to a crossroads of fate." The investigation took on an almost ritualistic cadence as the day wore on. Holmes methodically retraced the keeper's footsteps, revisiting locations that the keeper had frequented in his new guise. Every whispered conversation, every subtle clue that had been overlooked by those untrained in the art of deduction, was now given its due significance. In the minutiae of human conduct, there lies a truth that is often hidden from the unobservant eye, Holmes noted. His voice a blend of scholarly conviction and raw determination. Watson, ever the observer, documented each step with meticulous care, knowing that the smallest detail might unravel the entire tapestry of deception. It was during one of these long hours of inquiry that an unexpected revelation emerged from an inconspicuous remark made by a local tradesman. The tradesman recounted that, years before the keeper's disappearance, a stranger had passed through the village with an air of urgency and a marked familiarity with the lighthouse. "I remember the man clearly," the tradesman stated, his tone measured yet tinged with disbelief. "He moved with purpose, as if he had unfinished business with the very soul of this place." Holmes, upon hearing this account, immediately sensed that the stranger's presence was not incidental. "This is the first of many breadcrumbs left to mislead us," he commented. "Yet every breadcrumb is a reminder that the past is never truly buried." As the day waned into an evening suffused with a palpable tension, Holmes and Watson convened to synthesize the multitude of clues that had emerged. The conversation between the two was marked by a blend of analytical rigor and an almost poetic lament for the inexorable nature of fate. "Watson," The evidence before us is not merely the residue of a man's disappearance, but the echo of a life that was once vibrant with both virtue and vice, Holmes declared, his tone imbued with both melancholy and resolve. Watson replied in measured tones, "We stand at the threshold of a revelation, one that promises to expose not only the truth of a single disappearance, but the intertwined destinies of those who seek to outrun their pasts." The dialogue between them was not solely an exchange of observations, but a meditative exploration of the human condition, the interplay between sin and redemption, and the burdens that the past imposes upon the present. Holmes mused, "It is not uncommon for the darkest chapters of one's life to resurface in the guise of a mystery. The keeper, who once trod the shadowed corridors of disgrace, now faces the repercussions of a history that refuses to be erased. Watson, whose pen captured every nuance, recorded his thoughts with an introspective clarity that echoed the sentiment of the moment. In every crime and every act of concealment lies a truth waiting to be unearthed, a truth that demands justice, even when it arrives cloaked in the disguise of a carefully orchestrated vanishing." Amidst the unfolding investigation, an undercurrent of foreboding began to seep into the narrative. Holmes observed that the strategic placement of the bloody coat and the calculated nature of the evidence suggested that the keeper's disappearance was not a spontaneous act of desperation, but a meticulously planned maneuver. "There is a deliberate artistry in this deception," he noted, "an artistry that speaks of a mind both cunning and deeply tormented." Watson, reflecting on the gravity of the situation, remarked that every piece of evidence seemed to pulse with the echoes of a life once marred by error, a life that had attempted to escape the clutches of a relentless past. The detective's intuition grew sharper as he began to piece together the fragments of the keeper's former life. His mind wandered to a time when the keeper, known by another name in a different era, had been entangled in a criminal underworld where loyalty was as fleeting as the morning mist. "I have encountered many men who have sought refuge in new identities," Holmes recalled, "but few have managed to cloak their true selves so completely. The marks of his past are etched in every subtle irregularity of his behavior, every slight tremor of hesitation that betrays a hidden regret." Watson recorded these reflections with the solemn understanding that the keeper's past was not merely an incidental footnote, but the very keystone of the mystery at hand. A further twist in the narrative was hinted at when a letter arrived at Baker Street, its contents cryptic yet laced with an unmistakable threat. Holmes examined the letter with a critical eye, noting the careful choice of words that suggested a vendetta, a grudge born from years of concealed animosity. "This letter is not a mere communication," Holmes declared, "but a declaration of intent. It speaks of old debts and promises of retribution." Watson, equally attentive to the implications, noted in his journal that the language of the letter bore the indelible imprint of a man who had once been intimately acquainted with the keeper's darkest secrets. In the hours that followed, Holmes delved into the depths of the keeper's past with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His inquiries led him to cross-reference the keeper's known whereabouts with records of past misdeeds and financial irregularities. Every document, every faded photograph from an era long past was scrutinized with the precision of a surgeon. The evidence, though scattered and obscure, forms a pattern that speaks of both betrayal and the desperate need for reinvention, he remarked. Watson recorded that the meticulous nature of Holmes' work was a testament to the detective's unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The day's investigations culminated in an impassioned conversation between Holmes and Watson, in which the detective revealed his growing suspicion that an old enemy was at the heart of the keeper's elaborate ruse. "There exists a man from the keeper's former life, a man whose name is whispered in the corridors of criminal infamy," Holmes confided. "This adversary, driven by a thirst for vengeance, may have recognized the keeper despite his best efforts to fade into obscurity. The clues point not to an accidental disappearance, but to a premeditated attempt to escape a legacy that refuses to remain in the past." Watson, who had long admired Holmes' ability to see beyond the obvious, recorded his agreement. The notion that an enemy from the Keeper's earlier days could have orchestrated this elaborate facade is both chilling and compelling. It suggests that the forces of retribution are never far behind, no matter how deeply one buries one's sins. As twilight surrendered to the encroaching darkness of night, Holmes and Watson retired to Baker Street with their minds swirling with unanswered questions and a determination to delve deeper into the enigma. Holmes' final words before the day ended resonated with an almost prophetic certainty. "The truth, Watson, is like the light of a distant beacon. It may flicker and wane amidst the fog of deception, but it will eventually shine forth, illuminating the path to justice." Watson, inspired by the detective's unwavering resolve, recorded in his journal that the case of the vanishing lighthouse keeper was not merely a fleeting puzzle, but a saga that promised to reveal the profound interplay between past transgressions and present reckonings. Thus concluded the first phase of their inquiry, a phase marked by revelations that were as unsettling as they were intriguing. The mysterious disappearance of the lighthouse keeper, the blood-stained coat that had spoken volumes without uttering a word, and the shadow of an old enemy lurking on the fringes of the past had set the stage for a mystery that promised to challenge even the greatest of minds. Holmes and Watson, united by their shared quest for truth, prepared to unravel the threads of a conspiracy that had been woven long before the keeper's disappearance. A conspiracy that was destined to expose the darkest recesses of a troubled soul. In the quiet aftermath of the day's discoveries, as the lamp of Baker Street burned steadily in the encroaching night, Holmes' mind continued to churn with possibilities. He pondered the delicate balance between guilt and redemption, the transformative power of secrets, and the inexorable nature of revenge. Every man who seeks to escape his past must eventually confront it, he mused, his thoughts a blend of melancholy and determination. The keeper's choice to vanish was an act of desperation, a final attempt to outrun the relentless shadows of memory. Watson, ever observant, noted that the detective's tone carried an undercurrent of personal reflection, as if the case had stirred memories of battles fought in the labyrinth of human frailty. As the hours slipped by, the detective's investigations began to reveal more than just the identity of a man in hiding. They began to expose the raw vulnerabilities of the human spirit. In the quiet solitude of his study, Holmes reviewed the collected evidence with a precision that left no detail unexamined. He contemplated the paradox of a man who had once worn the mantle of disgrace and now sought refuge in anonymity, only to find that the very act of escape had ensnared him in a web of unforeseen consequences. There is an irony in the pursuit of a new identity, he reflected aloud. For every attempt to rewrite one's history leaves behind echoes that resonate with the truth. Watson, whose admiration for Holmes' ability to distill complex emotions into simple truths was unwavering, recorded this moment as one of profound insight. The narrative of the day wound its way through moments of quiet revelation and intense introspection. Each piece of evidence, each whispered conversation, and every silent testimony left by the elusive keeper wove together a tapestry of mystery that challenged the very notion of redemption. Holmes' analytical mind worked tirelessly to connect the disparate clues. A blood-stained garment here, a cryptic note there, the recollections of an old adversary. And in doing so, he began to outline a narrative that was as intricate as it was inevitable. "We are not merely chasing a ghost," he remarked, "but pursuing a man who has long since been entombed by his own past, only to be exhumed by the relentless forces of fate." As the night deepened, a palpable tension settled over Baker Street. Homer's determination to unravel the keeper's past was mirrored by Watson's quiet resolve to document every step of their journey. In the silence of that long night, the detective's thoughts circled around the notion of identity and the relentless pursuit of justice. "A man who hides from his own history cannot escape the truth," he murmured, his voice low yet resolute. "It is only a matter of time before the past catches up with him, and when it does, no amount of cunning can shield him from the reckoning." Watson, inspired by this declaration, committed himself to ensuring that every facet of the investigation would be recorded for posterity, a record of not just a mystery solved, but a life reclaimed from the clutches of regret. By the time the first light of dawn began to pierce the darkness, the groundwork for a far-reaching investigation had been firmly established. Holmes and Watson, having reviewed every scrap of evidence and every whispered account, retired with a shared understanding that the case of the vanishing lighthouse keeper was far from ordinary. We stand on the threshold of revelations that will shake the very foundations of what we know about identity and redemption, Holmes said with a quiet intensity as he prepared for another day of inquiry. Watson, his heart heavy with both anticipation and concern, recorded that moment as the genesis of a pursuit that would test the limits of their resolve and force them to confront the demons of the past. Thus ended the first chapter of a mystery that promised to unravel in layers of complexity and intrigue. A mystery where every word, every silence, and every gesture was laden with the potential to reveal a truth hidden beneath the veneer of a carefully constructed facade. The vanishing of the lighthouse keeper, marked by a blood-stained coat and the shadow of an old enemy, had set in motion a chain of events that would demand the full measure of Holmes' legendary acumen and Watson's steadfast loyalty. In that quiet moment of reflection, both men knew that the journey ahead was as perilous as it was inevitable, and that the truth, however obscured by the mists of time and memory, would eventually rise like a beacon in the darkness. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Recognition. Holmes and Watson resumed their inquiry with a relentless fervor that rivaled the intensity of the mystery itself. In the days following their initial foray into the enigmatic disappearance of the lighthouse keeper, both men found themselves drawn deeper into a labyrinth of forgotten allegiances and buried transgressions. Holmes noted in a measured tone, "Every clue is a thread in the tapestry of deception. We must unravel each one to expose the truth." Watson recorded this sentiment in his journal, acknowledging that the keeper's past was a shadowy mirror reflecting crimes long concealed. Their investigation now turned to the cryptic journal discovered in a dilapidated trunk, a relic that seemed to harbor confessions of old sins and secret promises of absolution. Holmes scrutinized the faded ink and measured each carefully penned word, remarking that the journal was not merely a record of remorse, but a deliberate attempt to encode vital clues. "Watson," he observed, "this journal speaks in riddles, a cipher intended to both hide and reveal the keeper's true identity. We must decipher its meaning if we are to grasp the motive behind his vanishing act." Watson, ever the faithful scribe, noted the interplay between guilt and defiance that permeated the document, recording that every hesitation in the script hinted at a deeper layer of regret. In the course of their inquiry, a new thread of evidence emerged when Holmes revisited the testimony of a local tradesman who had recalled a stranger with an air of urgency and familiarity with the lighthouse. The recollection was as disconcerting as it was illuminating. The tradesman said in a low, reflective tone that he had seen a man whose bearing suggested a past that was both tumultuous and unforgiving. The stranger's presence, Watson recorded later, seemed not to belong to the quiet rhythms of our coastal community, but rather to the echoes of a turbulent history. Holmes concurred, stating that such an encounter could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. "There is a sinister undercurrent at work here," he murmured. "It appears that the keeper's carefully constructed facade may have been compromised by someone who recognized him from a time when his identity was not so well hidden." Intent on following this promising lead, Holmes and Watson revisited the archive of old records, a repository of documents that detailed the criminal underworld of decades past. The records revealed the existence of a man who had once been notorious for his involvement in a series of illicit activities. His name had been expunged from recent memory, replaced by the quiet dignity of a man who had assumed a new identity as the lighthouse keeper. As Holmes pored over these documents, he remarked, "It is evident that our keeper was once entangled in the web of criminality. His past is interlaced with accounts of betrayal and desperate gambits, And it is this very past that appears to be clawing its way back into the present. Watson noted in his journal that the records hinted at a former convict who had not only faked his death, but had also meticulously concealed his identity over the years. Until now, as the days turned into a blur of careful cross-referencing and methodical interviews, a pattern began to emerge from the disparate clues. Holmes recalled a conversation with a local who had spoken of hushed whispers regarding a man known only by his former alias, a name that evoked dread in the annals of the criminal underworld. The past, Holmes remarked quietly, is not easily erased. It lingers like a spectre, waiting for the opportune moment to resurface. Watson recorded that the evidence, though scattered, was converging toward the revelation that the keeper's faked demise was not simply a means of escape, but an elaborate act of reinvention orchestrated under the constant threat of retribution from an old enemy. This notion was further reinforced by the discovery of another letter, a message that had arrived at Baker Street bearing a tone of bitter retribution. The letter, penned in a style reminiscent of a bygone era, carried with it an unmistakable threat. Holmes read aloud the carefully chosen phrases that spoke of past debts and a promise of vengeance, remarking that the language was deliberate and ominous. The words in this letter are not those of a mere malcontent, he stated, but of someone who has nurtured a vendetta long enough to let it fester into a dangerous obsession. Watson, his pen moving rapidly across the page, recorded that the letter's implication was clear. Someone from the keeper's former life had emerged to reclaim a perceived injustice. In a series of measured steps, Holmes embarked on a painstaking process of re-examination, revisiting every scrap of evidence with an eye for minutiae. Each fragment of information, from the subtle irregularity of the keeper's handwriting in the journal to the specific choice of fabric in the blood-stained coat, became a clue in the intricate puzzle that now dominated their thoughts. Every detail, Holmes stated with unyielding conviction, is a deliberate clue left by a man who has spent decades hiding behind an assumed identity. Yet even the most carefully constructed masquerade can be unraveled by a single misstep. Watson, ever the chronicler of these revelations, recorded that the detective's observations lent new meaning to the phrase, "The past never dies." The investigation took an unexpected turn when Holmes received a confidential tip from an informant whose identity remained shrouded in secrecy. The informant, communicating through a series of carefully coded messages, confirmed that the keeper's disappearance was intricately linked to an old rivalry. A rivalry that had its roots in a series of events that had once rocked the foundations of the criminal elite. "I have seen the man you seek," the informant wrote in one of the missives, "and I can attest that his past is marked by the scars of vengeance. One who once knew him well has now reappeared, determined to reclaim what was lost." Holmes remarked that the tone of the message was both a warning and a confirmation. It was a subtle admission that the keeper's carefully orchestrated escape was now compromised by the emergence of an adversary whose motives were fueled by old grudges. As the days passed in a blur of inquiry and deduction, the duo found themselves retracing the steps of the keeper's former life. Holmes delved into the annals of criminal history, unearthing stories of betrayal and desperation that had once defined the life of the man behind the new identity. Watson recorded that the keeper's transformation, from a notorious convict to a reclusive lighthouse keeper, was a narrative of both redemption and exile, one that was punctuated by the harsh realities of a society unwilling to forgive past transgressions. The man, Holmes observed during one of their lengthy discussions, sought to bury his former self beneath the weight of a new existence. Yet the inexorable pull of his past has now ensnared him in a trap from which even he may find no escape. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed each new discovery, Holmes' mind was consumed by the intricacies of human nature. He remarked that the very act of faking one's death was an admission that the truth was too heavy a burden to bear. To reinvent oneself, he stated in a tone that mixed empathy with steely resolve, is to acknowledge that the past is a relentless force, a force that, if not confronted, will eventually catch up with even the most determined of souls. Watson, whose admiration for Holmes' capacity for introspection was boundless, recorded that the detective's insights illuminated not only the mechanics of the mystery at hand, but also the timeless struggle between one's history and one's desire for absolution. Amidst these reflections, another piece of evidence began to take shape. A series of cryptic entries in the keeper's journal that alluded to a clandestine meeting held years earlier. The entries spoke of a rendezvous with a man whose presence had long haunted the corridors of the keeper's memory. Holmes deciphered the subtle language with a practiced eye, remarking that the choice of words was as deliberate as it was revealing. The keeper intended these entries as both a confession and a caution, he explained, a message to himself and perhaps to someone who might one day seek to uncover his secrets. Watson noted that the language was imbued with an almost desperate need for escape, a need that now, in retrospect, underscored the keeper's ultimate decision to fake his death. As the investigation unfolded, the spectre of the keeper's past grew ever more tangible. Holmes' inquiries led him to confront individuals who had once been associated with the convict's former life, men whose loyalties had shifted like the tides and whose memories of past betrayals ran deep. In a discreet conversation with a retired lawman who had once tracked the movements of notorious criminals, Holmes learned of an adversary who had earned a fearsome reputation for his ruthlessness and cunning. He was a man who had once shared in the keeper's misdeeds, the lawman recalled in a measured tone, but had long since been cast aside in a bitter struggle for dominance. I have heard whispers that his return is driven by a desire for retribution, a desire that has now found its mark in the man we pursue. Watson recorded that this revelation lent new urgency to their search, as it became apparent that the stakes of the case extended far beyond the disappearance itself. The threads of evidence continued to intertwine as Holmes methodically pieced together the puzzle. He noted that the keeper's disappearance, the carefully staged blood-stained coat, and the cryptic hints in his journal were all components of a grand design, a design that now, with the re-emergence of an old enemy, threatened to expose long-held secrets. "This is not a random act of desperation," Holmes remarked during one of his lengthy contemplations, "but a meticulously planned escape from a past that refuses to be forgotten. The enemy who has resurfaced is determined to force the keeper to confront the sins he so desperately sought to erase." Watson, his handwriting steady as he recorded each word, acknowledged that the convergence of these elements transformed the case from a mere disappearance into a battle between the inevitability of retribution and the hope for redemption. The days that followed were marked by a series of measured interrogations and discreet meetings with those who had once been part of the keeper's shadowed world. In one such conversation, a gaunt man with haunted eyes recounted the tales of their youthful indiscretions, a time when the lines between loyalty and betrayal were blurred by the necessity of survival. "We were all bound by the same code of silence," the man said softly, his voice laden with regret. But the keeper was always different. He dreamed of a day when he could cast off the chains of his past, even if it meant embracing a new identity. Holmes listened intently, his gaze unyielding as he absorbed every nuance of the account. Watson later noted that the man's recollections painted a portrait of an individual tormented by the duality of his existence, a man who had once been as ruthless as he was desperate, and who now lived in the hope that the ghosts of his past would remain forever banished. In the midst of these revelations, another unexpected development surfaced. A minor yet significant detail, the presence of a peculiar emblem embroidered on the inner lining of the keeper's blood-stained coat, captured Holmes' attention. With meticulous care, he traced the emblem's origins to a clandestine organization that had once operated in the margins of society. "This insignia," he declared during a quiet moment of reflection, "is a mark of affiliation with a network that thrives on secrecy and retribution. Its appearance on the coat is not accidental. It is a deliberate signal, a remnant of a past that the keeper could not entirely escape." Watson recorded that the emblem, like the other clues, reinforced the notion that the keeper's disappearance was intricately linked to a world of betrayal and calculated vengeance, a world that had once claimed him and now sought to reclaim him. As the investigation deepened, Holmes began to outline the contours of a confrontation that was as inevitable as it was perilous. He surmised that the enemy who had recognized the Keeper was not merely a random figure from the past, but a man whose vendetta was personal and unyielding. This adversary, Holmes said with a tone of grim determination, has spent years nurturing a grudge that now manifests in a calculated effort to force the Keeper's hand. The recognition of his true identity is but the first step in a series of maneuvers designed to corner him into a confession of his past misdeeds. Watson recorded that the detective's analysis was based on the confluence of evidence, a confluence that left little doubt that the Keeper's carefully constructed refuge was under threat. Throughout the relentless days of inquiry, Holmes' determination never waned. Every conversation, every coded message, and every obscure reference in the journal was scrutinized with the precision of a master detective. In moments of quiet contemplation, he confided to Watson that the complexity of the case was both a challenge and a calling. A call to uncover a truth that was as much about the human condition as it was about criminal intrigue. The Keeper's plight, he mused, is a testament to the enduring struggle between the desire to escape one's past and the inevitable reckoning that follows. In his attempt to rewrite his fate, he has only invited the return of old enemies who will not rest until the scales of justice are balanced. Watson, moved by the profound insight, recorded that the detective's words resonated deeply with the notion that every man, regardless of the lengths he goes to conceal his past, is ultimately bound by the immutable laws of consequence. In one final twist that added yet another layer to the mystery, Holmes discovered evidence suggesting that the enemy's recognition of the Keeper had not been an isolated incident. A series of anonymous communications, snippets of overheard conversation, coded letters, and discreet gestures exchanged in shadowed corridors indicated that multiple parties within the Keeper's former world had taken an interest in his new identity. It appears, Holmes remarked during a particularly intense discussion with Watson, that the Keeper's past is not as solitary as we once believed. There are those who have maintained their vigilance, watching for the day when he might reappear, and among them is one whose intentions are as dark as they are vindictive. Watson noted that this revelation further complicated the case, for it meant that the Keeper was surrounded not only by the spectre of a single adversary, but by an entire network of those who had once shared in his criminal endeavors. As the investigation edged toward a critical juncture, Holmes and Watson resolved to confront the mounting evidence head-on. In a conversation that was both resolute and tinged with the inevitability of fate, Holmes declared that the time had come to set a trap designed to lure the enemy out of the shadows and force him to reveal his true intentions. We must create a situation in which the Keeper's past and present collide, he stated, for it is only by facing the enemy directly that we can hope to disentangle the web of deceit that has ensnared him. Watson recorded this plan with a sense of trepidation, acknowledging that the confrontation promised to be as dangerous as it was necessary. In the ensuing hours, the duo worked tirelessly to orchestrate a meeting of circumstances, a carefully calibrated encounter that would bring the Keeper's old adversaries into the light. Every detail was scrutinized, every possible outcome weighed with the rigor of scientific inquiry. Holmes maintained that the trap must be set with both precision and subtlety, for the enemy was as cunning as he was vengeful. A direct confrontation may force his hand, Holmes said quietly, but we must be prepared for a reaction that could unleash a torrent of violence born from years of pent-up resentment. Watson recorded that the plan, though fraught with risk, was a necessary step toward unmasking the truth behind the Keeper's disappearance. As the day of the planned encounter drew near, a palpable tension settled over their deliberations. Holmes, with his customary calm, reviewed the evidence one final time. Each piece a testament to a life lived in the shadows of guilt and retribution. Watson observed that the detective's focus was unwavering, his mind a fortress built upon years of experience and an unerring sense of justice. "We stand at the crossroads of past and present," Holmes remarked, "and the path we choose will determine whether the keeper's secrets remain buried or are brought to light by the fire of retribution." Watson recorded that sentiment with a heavy heart, understanding that the confrontation promised not only to reveal the enemy's identity, but also to force the keeper into a reckoning with the man he once was. In the quiet culmination of their preparations, Holmes and Watson resolved to proceed with a determination that belied the gravity of the stakes. Each step taken, every conversation recorded, and all the whispers of a long-forgotten past had led them to this moment. A moment when the lines between guilt and redemption would blur, and the truth would finally emerge from the darkness. Holmes stated with measured finality, "The enemy has been cornered by the relentless passage of time and the weight of his own grievances. It is only a matter of time before his recognition of the keeper becomes a catalyst for an irreversible confrontation. A confrontation that will force us all to confront the price of secrets kept too long." Watson, penning these words with a steady resolve, recorded that the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, yet illuminated by the unwavering light of truth. Thus, as the shadow of recognition loomed ever larger over the keeper's new existence, Holmes and Watson braced themselves for the inevitable collision of past and present. The mystery, now an intricate interplay of coded messages, veiled threats, and the indomitable will to escape one's history, was fast approaching its critical crescendo. In the quiet confidence of their preparation, the detective and his assistant recognized that every whispered confession, every symbol etched in fabric, and every carefully chosen word in an anonymous letter was a stepping stone toward a confrontation that promised to unearth the hidden sins of a man determined to outrun his past. In the silent space between strategy and execution, Holmes' thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the inexorable nature of fate. A man who attempts to rewrite his destiny by faking his own demise must eventually face the truth, he mused softly, his words echoing with the weight of inevitability. The enemy we pursue is not merely a spectre of vengeance, but the embodiment of the keeper's own unresolved guilt. A reminder that the past, no matter how fervently concealed, has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Watson, his heart resonating with the gravity of these revelations, recorded that the detective's words captured the essence of a man caught between the desire for redemption and the burden of history. As the hours melted into the threshold of the planned encounter, Holmes and Watson maintained a steady vigil over the threads of fate they had so carefully woven. Every new piece of evidence, every coded missive, and every whispered conversation reinforced the conviction that the keeper's disappearance was not a solitary act of desperation, but the culmination of a lifetime of decisions that now demanded reckoning. Holmes declared that the time had come to let the trap be sprung, confident that the enemy's recognition of the keeper would serve as the spark that ignited the final act of this elaborate drama. In the final moments before the confrontation, the detective's eyes shone with an intensity that betrayed the quiet determination of his soul. "Let us now step into the arena where past and present collide," he stated with a voice imbued with both resolve and sorrow. "For in this collision lies the redemption of a man haunted by his own misdeeds, and the unmasking of an enemy who has long thrived in the darkness of old grudges." Watson, recording these final words as a promise of the inevitable, acknowledged that the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of justice, loyalty, and the unyielding power of truth. Thus, in the unfolding hours of that fateful day, the intricate web of deception and retribution began to tighten around the keeper's elusive identity. Holmes and Watson, armed with the clarity of deduction and the unwavering pursuit of justice, prepared themselves for the moment when the enemy would be forced to reveal himself. A moment when the keeper's carefully constructed refuge would be laid bare before the relentless scrutiny of truth. And as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it became unmistakably clear that the shadow of recognition had not only threatened to expose a life built on falsehoods, but had also set the stage for a reckoning that would forever alter the course of a troubled soul. In this charged atmosphere of impending confrontation, the narrative of the keepers, past and present, wove together with the inexorable momentum of destiny. Holmes, ever the master of unmasking hidden truths, reflected that the pursuit of justice was a path fraught with both peril and promise. "We must now allow the truth to emerge from the murk of deceit," he intoned, his voice resonating with the certainty of one who has seen through the veil of pretense. For every lie, no matter how carefully constructed, carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. Watson, documenting each of these moments with a sense of both awe and solemnity, recorded that the unfolding events were a testament to the indomitable nature of truth, a truth that, in the end, would shine through even the darkest of deceptions. And so, as the shadow of recognition continued to cast its long and inescapable presence over the keeper's secret existence, Holmes and Watson braced themselves for the collision of forces that would soon bring everything into stark relief. The confrontation promised to be a turning point, a moment when the keeper's long-hidden past would come face to face with the relentless demands of justice, and when the enemy's bitter vendetta would finally be laid bare. In that decisive instant, every whispered secret, every coded clue, and every measure of cunning would be tested against the unyielding truth that had been their guiding star throughout this labyrinthine investigation. With the trap set, and the enemy's recognition of the keeper now an undeniable catalyst, Holmes and Watson prepared to usher in the next chapter of this unfolding drama. A chapter where the confrontation between past and present would force a reckoning that neither time nor deceit could forestall. Their resolve was unwavering, their purpose clear, and the weight of history pressed upon them as a reminder that in the realm of secrets, no man could ever truly escape the consequences of his own actions. Thus concluded the chapter of mounting tension and inexorable fate, a chapter in which every piece of evidence, every cautious remark, and every unspoken truth wove together into a narrative that promised to redefine the boundaries of redemption and retribution. The keeper's secret, once shrouded in layers of meticulously crafted deceit, now stood on the precipice of exposure, and the enemy's bitter recognition would soon force the inevitable collision of lives long divided by guilt and longing. In the quiet determination of their final preparations, Holmes and Watson acknowledged that the case had evolved into a battle not only for justice, but for the soul of a man who had long sought to outrun his own past. And as the moment of confrontation drew near, their shared conviction remained steadfast, that in the interplay of recognition and retribution, the truth, however obscured by the shadows of memory, would ultimately prevail. Chapter 3. The Confrontation of Shadows. As the trap set by Holmes and Watson reached its appointed moment, the subtle intricacies of the case coalesced into a decisive confrontation. Holmes, ever the master of deduction, had orchestrated every detail with methodical precision, and now the culmination of their efforts was at hand. The hours leading up to the encounter were filled with quiet determination and calculated resolve. Watson recorded that every moment pulsed with an almost palpable intensity, for each second bore the weight of impending justice. Holmes stated, in his characteristically measured tone, that the time for subtlety had passed. Soon, the truth would be laid bare, and the enemy, who had lurked in the shadows for so long, would be forced to confront the consequences of his past transgressions. Holmes recalled the meticulous planning that had preceded this confrontation, noting that every element of the trap was designed to draw out the adversary. Watson noted that the lure was not solely physical, but also a psychological gambit meant to expose the enemy's most guarded vulnerabilities. "We have set the stage for the inevitable," Holmes remarked quietly, "and the play is about to reach its climax." Watson's pen noted that the detective's voice, though calm, trembled ever so slightly with the sorrow of knowing that the confrontation was not merely a quest for truth, but also a reckoning with sins that had haunted a man for decades. The encounter began with a quiet approach, as Holmes and Watson observed from a discreet distance, their eyes fixed on the designated meeting place. Their vigil was marked by silent moments of anticipation, punctuated by the soft murmur of exchanged observations. Holmes opined that the silence was as much a part of the trap as any carefully planted clue, while Watson recorded that every subtle movement, a shifting shadow, a faint rustle of fabric, served as an omen that the enemy's time to emerge had come. The duo was prepared for a confrontation that promised both peril and revelation. Their objective was clear: force the enemy out of hiding and expose the truth behind the keeper's fabricated disappearance. Before long, a solitary figure emerged from the darkness, a man moving with a deliberate, measured gait that belied an inner tempest of bitterness and resolve. His features, marked by years of hardship and hardened resolve, confirmed Holmes' suspicions. The detective noted, "This is the man whose vendetta has spanned decades, the one who recognized the keeper despite all efforts at concealment." Watson recorded that the enemy's eyes shone with a cold, unyielding fire. In that gaze, Watson saw the embers of a long-held grudge, a grudge that had festered until this moment of inevitable confrontation. The enemy advanced with deliberate intent, and as he neared, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Holmes, maintaining his customary composure, initiated the exchange with a measured greeting, a calm that masked the storm brewing beneath. He remarked that every man carries the weight of his past like a shadow that will, sooner or later, stretch forth to reclaim him. The enemy replied in a voice that was as steady as it was biting, stating that the past was an inescapable spectre destined to haunt those who attempted to flee it. Watson recorded that every word exchanged was a carefully choreographed dance of accusation and defiance, a silent duel of wits and unspoken grudges. As the conversation unfolded, Holmes probed the enemy's motives with relentless precision, seeking the roots of his vendetta. He observed that the enemy's recognition of the keeper was no mere chance, but a deliberate act of retribution, an effort to drag the man back into the realm of guilt and punishment. Watson noted that the enemy's responses, though measured, betrayed deep-seated resentment. In a flat, matter-of-fact tone, the enemy recounted that he had once been closely associated with the keeper, that their lives had been inextricably intertwined in a web of crime and betrayal that had left scars too deep to heal. Holmes remarked that every detail was a clue. Each carefully chosen word, each pause laden with hidden meaning, was a step closer to unveiling the truth of their shared past. The intensity of the confrontation grew with every exchanged sentence. The enemy, his voice now tinged with both accusation and regret, declared that the keeper had once been a man of principle, a man whose fall from grace was the result of desperate choices and bitter betrayals. Holmes listened intently, noting that the enemy's account, though earnest, was laced with contradictions and the bitter influence of personal vendetta. Watson recorded that their dialogue was a study in human complexity, loyalty mixed with treachery, regret intermingled with the desire for retribution, all merging into an atmosphere charged with impending revelation. Holmes observed that the enemy's very presence was a testament to the truth that one can never entirely escape the past, and that every attempt at reinvention only summons forth the ghosts of former misdeeds. In the midst of this charged exchange, Holmes' incisive questions began to peel away the layers of deception that had long shielded the keeper's true identity. He asserted that the enemy's recognition was the catalyst that would soon force the keeper to confront the reality he had so desperately tried to hide. Watson recorded that Holmes' questions cut through the enemy's, carefully maintained composure like a scalpel, each query designed to expose the hidden undercurrents of guilt and revenge. In a tone of quiet intensity, Holmes said that every inflection, every hesitation in the enemy's replies was a key to unlocking the labyrinth of secrets that had defined the keeper's past. As the enemy grew increasingly unsettled by Holmes' relentless probing, he began to divulge fragments of a shared history that had long been shrouded in secrecy. He revealed, with a mixture of bitterness and resigned sorrow, that the keeper had once walked a path marred by sin, a path that had led him into the dark corridors of criminality. Watson noted that the enemy's words painted a portrait of a man torn between loyalty and treachery, whose fall from grace was as precipitous as it was inevitable. Holmes declared that the revelation confirmed his suspicions. The keeper had not been an innocent victim of circumstance, but an active participant in a saga of crime and retribution. A saga that now demanded to be confronted. The dialogue between Holmes and the enemy soon transformed into a battle of moral reckonings. Holmes maintained that the enemy's recognition was more than a mere recollection. It was an act of provocation meant to force the keeper's hand. Watson recorded that each statement was a volley in an unspoken war between past and present. The enemy argued, with fervent conviction, that the keeper's flight from his previous life was not an act of cowardice, but a necessary step toward escaping an inescapable fate. Holmes countered that every attempt to escape one's destiny is ultimately doomed, for the past, with all its sins and secrets, always resurfaces to demand its due. Watson noted that their exchange was imbued with the tragic inevitability of fate, a fate that would not allow the keeper to outrun his own history. As the confrontation neared its zenith, the interplay of words took on a cadence that resonated with the gravity of irreversible consequences. Holmes pronounced that the enemy's long-held grudge was not an isolated sentiment, but a manifestation of unresolved debts, a moral ledger that the keeper was destined to settle. Watson recorded that the detective's voice, though calm and measured, carried the weight of centuries of human frailty and the inevitability of consequence. The enemy, now tinged with desperation, declared that the keeper's attempt to adopt a new identity was nothing short of treachery, a betrayal of those who had once believed in him. Holmes replied that betrayal, once sown, cannot be easily undone, and that the keeper's fate was sealed by the immutable laws of justice and retribution. In a series of terse yet poignant exchanges, the confrontation reached a point where every word became a testament to the tragic beauty of human fallibility. Holmes, with unwavering resolve, stated that the keeper's life was an intricate tapestry of light and darkness, a tapestry now being unravelled thread by painful thread. Watson recorded that the enemy's voice, though harsh and unforgiving, occasionally betrayed a fleeting vulnerability, a glimpse of a soul tormented by regret and the inescapable burden of past misdeeds. In that moment, the confrontation transformed into more than a mere clash of adversaries. It became a solemn meditation on the immutable truth that every man must eventually confront the ghosts of his past. The enemy's final words, delivered in a voice that wavered between accusation and melancholic resignation, served as the final piece in the puzzle. He declared that the keeper had once been a man of promise, whose fall from grace was as tragic as it was inevitable. Holmes responded with a measured nod, his eyes revealing the profound sadness of a man who had witnessed too many souls succumb to the relentless passage of time and the inexorable pull of guilt. Watson recorded that in that silent exchange, the magnitude of the keeper's hidden life was laid bare, a life that had been carefully constructed over decades, only to be dismantled by the cruel hand of fate and retribution. In the moments that followed, the conversation shifted from recollection to the stark reality of consequence. Holmes articulated a series of observations that unmasked the inconsistencies in the enemy's tale, revealing that his recollections were tainted by personal bias and an unyielding desire for revenge. Watson noted that Holmes' voice was both indignant and sorrowful, a tone that underscored the tragic inevitability that every attempt to rewrite one's past carries with it the seeds of its own destruction. The enemy, his tone now edged with desperation, insisted that the keeper's flight from his previous life was an act of self-preservation, a desperate bid to outrun the inevitable judgment of those who remembered his true self. Holmes retorted that no man, no matter how ingeniously he constructs his new identity, can ever completely escape the moral consequences of his former actions. As the intensity of the confrontation reached its climax, the interplay of words and unspoken truths transformed the very air around them into a crucible of fate. Holmes pronounced, with a voice imbued with both authority and a profound sadness, that the keeper's carefully constructed facade was on the verge of collapse. Every lie, every secret carefully buried beneath layers of deceit, was now in danger of being exposed to the harsh light of truth. Watson recorded that the enemy's bitter vindication, though fueled by long-held grudges, had inadvertently become the final key that would unlock the keeper's hidden past. Holmes observed that the enemy's recognition was not simply an act of revenge, but a powerful catalyst that would force the keeper into a confrontation with the entirety of his concealed sins. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, Holmes and Watson retreated into reflective silence. Holmes stated that the enemy's appearance had been both a summons and a confession, a signal that the keeper's desperate attempt to erase his past was doomed to fail. Watson recorded that, in that profound quiet, every nuance of the encounter was replayed in their minds like a refrain from an old, sorrowful ballad. A ballad that spoke of loss, betrayal, and the unyielding grip of memory. Holmes remarked that the confrontation had irrevocably altered the course of their investigation, for it had laid bare the truth that the keeper's fate was now inexorably intertwined with the relentless forces of retribution and redemption. In the days that followed, as the memory of the confrontation seeped into every thought and every careful inquiry, Holmes and Watson found themselves reassembling the final fragments of the case. Holmes said that the enemy's bitter revelations had set into motion a chain of events that would soon force the keeper to step out of the shadows of his new identity. Watson noted that every piece of evidence, from the subtle irregularities in old records to the fleeting expressions of regret witnessed in the enemy's eyes, formed a mosaic that left no doubt. The keeper's past, though carefully concealed, was destined to reassert itself with unyielding force. During a quiet morning conversation, Holmes confided that the enemy's recognition was the turning point, a moment when the full magnitude of the keeper's hidden life was laid bare for those with the insight to see it. Watson recorded that the detective's eyes shone with a mixture of determination and sorrow as he declared that every attempt to outrun one's history was ultimately futile. Holmes stated that the keeper's carefully curated existence, built on layers of deceit and denial, was on the brink of collapse, and that the inevitable reckoning was at hand. As the hours passed, and the final light of dusk gave way to the steady approach of night, Holmes and Watson prepared themselves for what they knew would be the ultimate confrontation. The moment when the keeper himself would be compelled to answer for every hidden sin and every carefully concealed secret. Holmes explained that the enemy's bitter vendetta had served its purpose. It had drawn a clear line between the man the keeper had once been and the false identity he now wore like a shroud. Watson recorded that the detective's words, though somber, carried an unyielding certainty that justice would ultimately prevail, no matter how deeply buried the truth had been. In a final private exchange before the long night set in, Holmes remarked that the confrontation with the enemy had been both a revelation and a warning, a prelude to the inevitable moment when the keeper would have to face the full consequences of his past. Watson noted that the detective's tone was a blend of resolve and melancholy, for he knew that the pursuit of truth often exacted a heavy toll on both the pursuer and the pursued. Holmes declared that every man, regardless of how desperately he sought to reinvent himself, was ultimately bound by the inescapable chains of his own history, and that the keeper's fate was now sealed by the relentless forces of time and memory. Thus, as the final vestiges of night yielded to the promise of a new dawn, Holmes and Watson stood united in their determination to bring the keeper's secret into the light, a secret that had long been obscured by layers of deceit and the bitter echoes of old misdeeds. Holmes stated with quiet finality that the enemy's recognition had been the catalyst needed to unravel a mystery that had spanned decades, and that the keeper's carefully constructed world was now crumbling under the weight of an unyielding truth. Watson recorded that the final moments before the new day were filled with an almost tangible sense of inevitability, a certainty that every hidden lie would soon be exposed to the unforgiving glare of justice. In that serene, determined calm of early morning, Holmes declared that the final act of this long, intricate drama was upon them. Every whispered secret, every shadow of a long-forgotten transgression was poised to be brought to light, leaving no part of the keeper's past unexamined. Watson recorded that the detectives' hearts beat in unison with the rhythm of fate, a rhythm that had guided them relentlessly through the maze of human frailty and moral ambiguity. Holmes affirmed that the keeper, who had spent his life attempting to erase his former self, was now destined to confront the inevitable judgment that awaited him, a judgment wrought by the inexorable forces of retribution and redemption. And so, with hearts steeled by the trials of confrontation and minds sharpened by the relentless pursuit of truth, Holmes and Watson stepped forward into the final phase of their investigation. Every moment pulsed with the promise of final resolution, every word and every gesture a testament to the enduring power of justice. Holmes proclaimed that no matter how deeply one may attempt to hide from the past, the unyielding light of truth will ultimately reveal every hidden sin. Watson recorded that in that resolute moment, the detective's journey had come full circle, a journey that had transformed the keeper's secret from a carefully constructed myth into an undeniable reality. Thus concluded the third chapter, a chapter marked by bitter revelations, relentless probing, and the inexorable collision of past and present. The confrontation with the enemy had not only laid bare the keeper's hidden life, but had also set in motion a chain of events that promised a final, irrevocable reckoning. Holmes said that the enemy's bitter recognition was the turning point in a saga that had spanned decades, a turning point that would soon force the keeper to face the true consequences of his deeds. Watson recorded that in the silence following the confrontation, every heartbeat echoed with the truth that no man could ever escape the inescapable demands of his past. As the first light of a new day crept over the horizon, Holmes and Watson, united in their purpose and resolute in their determination, prepared to press on toward the final act of this intricate drama. They knew that the keeper's carefully guarded secret was on the verge of complete exposure, and that the forces of retribution and redemption would soon converge in a moment of absolute unyielding clarity. With that unspoken promise, the detectives advanced, each step a measured stride toward the final, inevitable reckoning that awaited the man who had spent so long fleeing from his own history. Chapter 4. The Reckoning of Redemption. The dawn that broke over the restless sea carried with it a promise of finality, a promise that the tangled threads of the keeper's past would at last be drawn together into one irreversible moment of truth. Holmes and Watson, their expressions etched with both determination and melancholy, had prepared themselves for the inevitable confrontation that now loomed as the culmination of years of careful deduction and patient inquiry. In the quiet solitude of early morning, as the first pale light crept over the horizon, the two companions steeled themselves for the reckoning that was about to unfold. Holmes recalled, with a measured intensity that betrayed neither excitement nor fear, that every case eventually arrives at the moment when all secrets must be unmasked. Watson recorded in his journal that the keeper's long-hidden sins, the carefully constructed ruse of faked death, and the bitter resurgence of a past enemy had all converged to create a situation that left no room for evasion. Every man, Holmes had once said, carries the weight of his former self like an unyielding shackle, and today that shackle is about to be cast aside by the unerring light of justice. In that moment, both men understood that the final act of this intricate drama would demand an unflinching confrontation with a truth too long denied. The stage for the final confrontation had been set with the precision of a masterful play. Over the preceding days, Holmes had orchestrated a series of maneuvers designed not only to lure the elusive keeper from his carefully constructed refuge, but also to force the hand of the enemy whose bitter recognition had spurred events thus far. The trap, a delicate combination of subterfuge and unavoidable fate, had been laid out with painstaking detail. Watson noted that every clue, from the minutest detail in the keeper's journal to the distinctive emblem embroidered on the inner lining of the blood-stained coat, had found its place in the mosaic of evidence that now demanded resolution. In the early hours, as the coastal winds whispered of secrets long kept, Holmes and Watson moved with deliberate calm toward the appointed meeting point, a quiet enclave where past transgressions and present guilt would soon collide. The atmosphere, heavy with the weight of unspoken reckonings, was charged with an energy that neither man could quite articulate. It was as if the very air around them trembled with anticipation of the revelations to come. Watson recorded that the silence between them was pregnant with memories of old cases, of men who had tried in vain to outrun their fate, and of the inexorable pull of a history that refuses to be forgotten. Before long, the figure of the keeper emerged from the shadows, a man whose every step was a silent admission of the life he had tried so desperately to leave behind. His features, at once rugged and marked by the passage of time, betrayed an inner turmoil that no amount of carefully cultivated anonymity could entirely conceal. Holmes observed the subtle tremor in the keeper's gait and the haunted look in his eyes, noting that these were the unmistakable signs of a man tormented by guilt and fear. Watson recorded that in that solitary figure, one could perceive not only the burden of past misdeeds, but also the desperate hope that perhaps, by disappearing, one might find redemption. The keeper's eyes darted nervously as he approached the rendezvous, and for a brief moment the silence was broken by the soft murmur of acknowledgement from an unseen observer, a voice that resonated with the authority of experience and the compassion of one who had seen too many lives undone by secrets. Holmes spoke in a low, deliberate tone, stating that the day had come when the charade must end. No man, he said, can continue to hide behind false identities and blood-stained coats when the truth, like the relentless tide, washes over all pretenses. His words were not harsh, but carried an undeniable finality that left no room for denial. The keeper paused, his eyes flickering with the ghost of a long-forgotten resolve. And in that suspended moment, the enemy, whose presence had haunted the investigation through whispered messages and clandestine warnings, stepped forward from the gathering gloom. The enemy's appearance was as sudden as it was fated, and his voice, when he spoke, was a mixture of bitter recollection and cold determination. "I have waited for this moment," the enemy declared, his tone measured, yet rife with a seething intensity. "I have watched as you, once a man of ill repute, attempted to bury your sins beneath the guise of a new life. Today, you must answer for every transgression, every betrayal that has marked your past." Holmes and Watson exchanged a glance that spoke of years of experience and an understanding that the forthcoming exchange was not merely a confrontation between individuals, but a collision of destinies. The keeper's face, half shrouded in shadow, revealed a flicker of recognition and remorse as he regarded the enemy. In a voice subdued by resignation, the keeper spoke. "I did what I had to do in order to escape the chains of my former self." His words, spoken as a confession rather than an excuse, resonated with a painful truth that neither time nor distance could erase. The enemy's eyes narrowed, and with a voice that trembled between anger and sorrow, he responded that escape was an illusion, a vain attempt to outrun the inexorable grip of the past. "Your flight was not one of redemption," he intoned, "but of cowardice. The debts you incurred, the lives you shattered, they still demand their due. I have come not merely to recognize you, but to exact a reckoning for the sins you believed could be forgotten." His words, though harsh, carried an undercurrent of a tragic inevitability, as if the enemy himself were bound by the unyielding laws of consequence. Holmes interjected, his tone imbued with both authority and pity, stating that every man who attempts to elude his fate finds that the past, with all its burdens, is never truly left behind. "We stand here," he said, "on the threshold of a truth that cannot be denied. The keeper's life, no matter how meticulously reinvented, is a tapestry woven from both light and shadow. And now, the time has come to face the full measure of that tapestry." Watson recorded that the detective's words were a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, is always exact in its own inescapable way. A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by the rhythmic lapping of distant waves and the steady beat of hearts burdened by regret. The keeper, whose eyes now glistened with a mixture of defiance and despair, confessed that his past was a labyrinth of mistakes, a maze from which he had hoped to escape by faking his own death. "I sought to erase the man I once was," he admitted softly, "to become someone unburdened by guilt and untainted by my misdeeds." His voice, trembling with the weight of confession, revealed that the escape was not born of malice, but of a desperate yearning for a second chance. A chance that now seemed as fragile as the morning light. The enemy's response was both a rebuke and a lament, as he recalled the days when the keeper had walked a path of shared sins and silent camaraderie, a path that had led them into the darkest corners of human fallibility. "We were bound by more than circumstance," the enemy recalled, his tone heavy with bitter memory. "We were complicit in acts that defied redemption. Your attempt to hide was never a solution. It was a betrayal of those who suffered because of our actions." His words resonated with a sorrow that went beyond personal animosity. They were the lament of a man who had borne witness to the consequences of a life lived on the edge of moral decay. Holmes observed that the confrontation had now reached a point of no return. With a calm yet resolute voice, he declared that every man must ultimately reckon with the legacy of his choices, for the passage of time does not erase guilt. It only deepens its imprint. The keeper's attempt to forge a new identity was a desperate bid for freedom, Holmes stated, but freedom built upon falsehoods is a fragile illusion. Today, we must allow the light of truth to penetrate that illusion so that justice may be served. His words carried the gravitas of a man who had seen the rise and fall of many who had tried to outrun their past, and Watson recorded that the detective's tone was as inevitable as the turning of the tide. In the ensuing moments, the air itself seemed to pulse with the silent cadence of fate. The keeper, his voice now trembling with an intensity born of long-hidden remorse, spoke of the sins that had driven him to feign his own death. "I was once a man ensnared by the seductive allure of vice," he admitted, each word laced with regret. "I committed acts that can never be undone, and in my desperation, I chose to vanish, to become nothing more than a ghost haunted by his own memories." His confession, though laced with sorrow, was also an acknowledgement that the path he had chosen was fraught with inescapable consequence. The enemy, his gaze unwavering, pressed further, demanding to know whether the keeper had ever sought redemption or merely attempted to outrun his fate. "Did you ever consider that the only true escape lies not in denial, but in the confrontation of your own demons?" he asked, his voice rising with the passion of a man who believed that only through facing one's past could there be any hope for atonement. The keeper's eyes, filled with a tumult of emotions, betrayed a deep-seated anguish as he admitted that redemption was a dream he had long abandoned, a fantasy that had crumbled under the relentless pressure of his guilt. Holmes then stepped forward to mediate between the opposing forces of retribution and regret. In a voice that was at once firm and compassionate, he declared that the true measure of a man's character was found not in his attempts to flee from the darkness, but in his willingness to confront it, no matter how painful the revelation. "Let this be a moment of reckoning," he proclaimed, "for only by facing the totality of one's past can there be even a semblance of redemption in the future." Watson recorded that in that quiet pronouncement, the detective encapsulated the eternal struggle between the desire to escape and the need to atone. A long pause followed, during which the keeper's gaze fell upon the enemy, a gaze that spoke of remorse, regret, and a desperate hope for forgiveness. The enemy, his face softened by an expression of sorrow, replied that forgiveness was a gift seldom granted and only earned by the most sincere acts of contrition. "I am not here merely to condemn," he stated quietly, "but to remind you that every action has a consequence, and every life, no matter how marred by sin, still holds the possibility of atonement if one is willing to accept the price of truth." His words, though heavy with the burden of judgment, carried an unexpected note of mercy. a recognition that even the most wayward soul might find solace in the light of accountability. As the dialogue unfolded, Holmes and Watson remained silent observers to this inner battle. A battle that was no longer one of external forces, but of the keeper's own tormented conscience. The keeper, his voice now barely more than a whisper, recounted the moments when he had been forced to confront the mirror of his own soul. "Every night, I heard the echoes of my past," he confided, his tone laden with melancholy, "and every echo reminded me of the irrevocable choices I had made. I tried to drown them in the silence of isolation, but they always found a way to resurface." Watson recorded that the keeper's admission was both a confession and an elegy, a testament to the inexorable pull of memory and the unyielding demands of accountability. In that charged atmosphere of mutual understanding and painful clarity, the enemy's expression softened further, and he regarded the keeper with an almost paternal compassion. "It is not too late," he murmured, his tone a fragile mixture of stern resolve and gentle hope, "to seek forgiveness, not merely from those you have wronged, but from yourself. For only when you embrace the totality of your past, with all its darkness and light, can you hope to begin the arduous journey toward redemption." His words, spoken as an offering of absolution, hung in the air like a benediction, a call to acknowledge that the road to atonement was paved not with denial, but with the courage to face one's own soul. Holmes, ever the observer of the human condition, noted that the enemy's transformation from a relentless avenger to a reluctant guide was a poignant reminder of the complexity of justice. "We are all, in some measure, prisoners of our own histories," he said softly, his voice echoing the timeless truth that the pursuit of redemption is a journey fraught with hardship and sacrifice. The keeper's flight, though born of desperation, has led him to a crossroads where the only way forward is to confront the man he once was, and in doing so, reclaim the possibility of a future unburdened by the past. Watson recorded that in that moment, the final confrontation had evolved into something far greater than a simple exchange of accusations. It had become a dialogue of souls, a moment where the boundaries between condemnation and compassion blurred into a singular, undeniable truth. As the morning matured into a day suffused with an almost tangible hope, the keeper's features shifted from a mask of regret to a tentative expression of resolve. He looked upon the enemy, once the embodiment of his inescapable past, and, with a voice trembling yet determined, he declared that he was ready to accept the consequences of his actions. "I can no longer hide from what I have done," he said, each syllable resonating with the raw vulnerability of a man on the brink of transformation. "I have spent too long in the shadows, believing that silence could shield me from the truth. Now, I must confront my sins, no matter the cost." Watson recorded that these words were the turning point, a moment when the keeper acknowledged that the only path to true redemption lay in the acceptance of responsibility. The enemy, his eyes glistening with a mixture of sorrow and relief, responded that the journey ahead would be fraught with pain, but also with the possibility of renewal. "The path to absolution is never an easy one," he intoned, "but it is a path that must be walked, step by painful step. In your confession, there is the promise of a new beginning, a promise that, if embraced, can lead to the healing of old wounds and the reclamation of a life once lost." His words, though stern, carried the warmth of an invitation to start anew, a recognition that even the darkest chapters of a life might someday give way to the light of contrition and renewal. Holmes, whose steady presence had been the guiding force throughout this labyrinthine investigation, now offered a final observation, a declaration that resonated with the timeless wisdom of a man who had witnessed the rise and fall of many souls. "Today," he stated with calm finality, "we witness not merely the end of a long pursuit, but the beginning of a new journey. The keeper's past, with all its grievous errors, has been laid bare for us, and in that vulnerability lies the potential for true transformation. Let this be a lesson to all who believe that one can outrun the inevitable reckoning of one's actions. The truth though hidden for a time, always finds a way to emerge, and only by accepting it can one hope to find peace. Watson recorded that the detectives' words encapsulated the essence of their quest, a quest for truth that demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront one's inner demons. In the ensuing silence that stretched across the expanse of that fateful day, the keeper, the enemy, Holmes, and Watson found themselves bound by a shared understanding that the past, no matter how deeply buried, was an integral part of the human soul. The keeper's confession, born of desperation and tempered by the hope of forgiveness, had irrevocably altered the course of his life. The enemy, once driven solely by vengeance, had discovered in the act of confrontation the possibility of reconciliation, a chance to atone for the shared sins of a past that could never be completely erased. And Holmes, ever the arbiter of truth, had demonstrated that the path to justice was paved not only with logic and deduction, but also with the profound recognition of human fallibility. As the day unfolded, the keeper was led away by the authorities, a quiet procession that bore the weight of both judgment and the promise of eventual absolution. In his final moments of solitary reflection before facing the consequences of his actions, he recalled the words he had spoken that morning, words that had marked the turning point of his existence. "I accept my past, and with it, I embrace the possibility of redemption," he murmured to himself, a whispered vow that mingled sorrow with a fragile hope for renewal. Watson recorded that his heart ached with the knowledge that the keeper's fate was now sealed by the inexorable laws of justice. Yet he could not help but marvel at the possibility that even a life mired in sin might someday find a way to be reborn. Holmes later reflected that the confrontation had revealed truths far deeper than the mere unmasking of a fugitive identity. It had exposed the intricate interplay between guilt and forgiveness, between the relentless pursuit of justice and the equally potent desire for redemption. "No man can truly escape the echoes of his past," he mused quietly, "for they are woven into the very fabric of his being." And yet, in the act of accepting those echoes, there lies the potential for a new symphony, a melody of remorse, contrition, and ultimately, hope. Watson recorded that in that moment, the detective's words transcended the confines of the case and spoke to the eternal struggle within every human heart. In the final hours of that day, as the keeper's fate was sealed by the unyielding machinery of justice, Holmes and Watson remained together in quiet reflection. The case had been one of the most intricate and sorrowful they had ever encountered, a tapestry of deception, regret, and the inexorable pull of a past that refused to be forgotten. Holmes remarked that while the keeper's journey had come to an end, the lessons learned from his plight would forever serve as a reminder that truth, however obscured by layers of deceit, is destined to rise like the dawn. Watson, whose pen had chronicled every twist and turn of this tragic saga, recorded that the final reckoning was not merely an act of retribution, but an opportunity, a painful yet necessary step toward healing, both for the individual and for the society that bore witness to the consequences of its own collective failures. "Let this day be remembered," Watson wrote in his journal, "as the moment when even the most haunted of souls was forced to confront the mirror of its own making, and in doing so, took the first tentative steps toward redemption." As the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of muted color, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out as if in lament, Holmes, Watson, and even the enemy were left to contemplate the inexorable nature of destiny. In that final twilight, the detective's parting words resonated with a quiet inevitability. We have seen tonight that no matter how deeply one buries the past, it remains an indelible part of one's identity. And only by acknowledging its presence can we hope to move forward into a future that holds the promise of genuine renewal. Watson recorded that sentiment with a deep sense of humility, understanding that the journey toward redemption was a universal one, a quest that transcended the boundaries of individual guilt and embraced the collective responsibility to face one's own history. Thus, In the final reckoning of redemption, the keeper's secret was no longer a shroud of deception, but a lesson etched in the annals of time. A reminder that every attempt to escape the truth only leads to a confrontation with the very essence of one's soul. The case of the vanishing lighthouse keeper, with all its twists, confrontations, and eventual confessions, had reached its solemn denouement. Holmes and Watson, their hearts heavy with the burden of the past, yet uplifted by the hope of a better future, had witnessed the inexorable march of justice, a force that, though sometimes cruel in its exactness, ultimately paved the way for transformation. In the quiet aftermath of that fateful day, as the sea resumed its ceaseless dialogue with the shore and the winds carried away the remnants of a long-hidden history, Homer's voice was heard once more. A voice that, even in the silence of reflection, reminded all who would listen that truth is an ever-present beacon. May we all learn from this, he intoned softly, that to face our past is not to be condemned by it, but to transcend it through the courage to be truly honest with ourselves. And so, as the final chapter of this long, arduous journey closed, the legacy of the keeper's secret endured, a legacy of human frailty and the possibility of redemption, of sins confessed, and the unyielding hope that even the darkest night can give way to a new dawn. Watson recorded in his journal that while the case had drawn to a close, the echoes of its lessons would resonate through every future endeavor. A timeless reminder that every man, no matter how burdened by the past, carries within him the potential for transformation when he dares to confront the truth.